Hello and welcome to Gist-ory. My name's Dave and it's good to have you here. First of all, I'm not a historian, I'm not an academic, I'm just a regular fella who loves a good story and I'm here for the tale. That means that I might get a few details wrong, I might miss a nuance or two, and I might get some facts muddled up. But here at Gist-ory, you might not get the whole story, but at least you'll get the gist. And this is episode 15 on our story of Britain, and we have reached World War II, the most destructive, deadliest conflict in the history of the world. Millions of lives were affected, thousands of books have been written about it, hundreds of movies have been made, and it all was started by one bloke, probably the most evil bloke there's ever been. You'll all have heard of him. It's Adolf Hitler. But he's the main villain of the piece, but he's just one of several major characters and personalities that are throughout this iconic period in history. It's a genuine world war, loads of stuff is going on, and it can be told from loads of different perspectives. But because this is the story of Britain, I'll be telling it from the British perspective. So I know there were loads of stuff going on with Russians, with Americans, in Pacific, all this sort of stuff. I know there's so many different facets to this, but I'll be telling this or giving you the gist of Britain's perspective during World War II. How the hell do we get through this? Well, without further ado, let's get into it. This is Great Britain and the Second World War. The year is 1933 and Europe is still in a right state. We're still suffering from the effects of World War I, which was literally a horror show. So much death, destruction, mud and blood. It were absolutely horrendous. And after the First World War, there was the Treaty of Versailles, where the victors of the First World War, who were Britain, France and America, redrew the map of Europe, mainly at the expense of the defeated powers, but chiefly at the expense of Germany. Germany were forced to pay reparations for what had happened in the war, even though everyone were responsible for this war happening. They also had to accept guilt for starting the war, and they had loads of land taken off them. Some people thought they got their just desserts. Others in Europe were thinking this is well harsh on Germany. In the post-war years, Germany gets devastated by this. Can't progress in anything as the shame of defeat, has to deal with all the loss of their soldiers, their family members, recover from the war while they've got this humiliation. They're having to pay massive, crippling debts for apparently starting a war that were everyone's fault. And resentment is growing and growing and growing. There is a League of Nations that's created at the Treaty of Versailles by Woodrow Wilson, who's the President of America, which is designed to maintain world peace. But Germany, they don't feel like they're part of this League of Nations. They're living under what's called the Weimar Republic, which is a republic set up by the victorious powers once the Kaiser Wilhelm, had been defeated. This is what was left for Germany in the city of Weimar. And they were really weak at dealing with this crisis. And then the worst happens. There is a Wall Street crash with the American stock market in 1929. America had been making money hand over fist, but it had also been bankrolling Germany and helping them with loans and investment and everything. And once that market crashes, everyone in the world crashes with it because everyone's tied into America, but none more so than Germany. It causes massive unemployment, loads of inflation, which means that the price that goods cost is massive. So they try combating that by printing more money, which means that the money in Germany is worthless. It's a right state, and the German people are depressed, angry, confused, and they're looking for answers. And there's someone who emerges who's willing to give them those answers. Not only give them those answers, but bring them back to their former glory. That is Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. So whenever there's a crisis in a country, people get radicalized and they like go to the extremes to try and change things for the better. So there's a load of support that starts being generated for radical parties. And there's one of these parties called the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as the Nazi Party. Now, they call themselves National Socialists because the nationalists, which are far right, the socialists, which are far left, and German workers is meant to include everyone. So they're everything to everyone. And the main figure that emerges in the Nazi Party is someone called Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is an Austrian. He was a failed painter. He joined the First World War as a soldier. He got gassed at the Third Battle of Ypres and was in hospital when the Germans signed the armistice, which was an agreement to stop fighting. But as we all now know, it was more of a surrender because they were forced to sign the war guilt clause and accept all of these crippling reparations payments and what have you. He is absolutely distraught by this, and he starts spouting, him and the Nazi Party, that this was a stab in the back when they accepted the surrender. He's saying that it wasn't the German army that surrendered. It was the people who were in power and the people who pull all the strings. And the people who he represents as being in power and manipulating people in power are the Jewish people. So he is of the belief that it was a plot by the Jewish people to stab the German army and the German people in the back. Throughout the 20s, he's tried to gain power. Like in 1923, he did what's called the Beer Hall Putsch, or the Munich Putsch, where him and his gang of Nazis tried to overtake key places in the government. It didn't go anywhere. It got put down. People got killed because they were shooting in streets and everything. And he got put on trial for treason. But in the courtroom, the judge was far right leaning and was sympathetic towards Hitler, and Hitler turned it into a bit of a theatre, saying, well, I did what I did for Germany and no one's sticking up for Germany and I put my neck on the line and blah, blah, blah. And he's on trial for treason and he gets the lowest sentence you can get, which is 5 years, and he only serves 9 months in prison, turns it into a massive publicity stunt. And while he's in prison, he writes Mein Kampf, which is my struggle. And it's his manifesto, really, for the Nazi Party, which is, it's all Jews' fault. The Germans are a part of a master race called the Aryans, and it's their destiny to become the Third Reich. So a Reich means empire. The First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire under someone called Charlemagne. The Second Reich was under Otto von Bismarck and the Kaiser, when Germany got all formed together out of all these different states it used to be in the 1800s, which got defeated in the First World War. And so he was dreaming of a Third Reich, a third empire. You see, paramilitary violence in elections was quite commonplace in the 1920s and the 1930s. So, yes, there's been extreme violence and people getting beaten up for their political beliefs. But it wasn't exactly shocking back then. But the Nazis always took it one step further because they had all these ideological beliefs. Like, everyone was scared of communism because the Russians had done a really bloody revolution in 1918, where communists, the workers who were based upon the teachings of someone called Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1800s, which was basically the workers of the world must unite and wealth should be shared. It shouldn't just be hoarded by capitalists, by certain groups of people. It should be shared out. The Russians took this to heart, rose up against the Tsar, who was the royal family, and basically executed him and his children, killed a load of people. It's ended up with someone called, after a bloody power struggle, someone called Joseph Stalin is in charge as the leader of communist Russia. And everyone's wary of it, especially all traditional governments in Europe. And Hitler starts framing communism as a Jewish plot. Because it's Karl Marx who it's associated with, he calls it Jewish Marxism, which is, he's saying the Jews created communism to destabilize countries so that they can take advantage of the chaos and they can be in charge of the whole system. And because Jewish people have long been associated with like financial institutions and they're very intellectual, they tend to be, or they can be in very prominent positions in companies in government. So he's kind of going at it from both ends. They're to blame for all the capitalist evils and all the socialist evils. It's just extremist bile. But the German people are desperate, and he don't come out with all this to the general population. Slowly introduces it. And because Germany's in such a state, in 1932 the Nazis become the largest party in the Reichstag, which is the German parliament. And in 1933, through trickery and manipulation, Hitler becomes the Chancellor of Germany. They're basically thinking the people who run the Reichstag. There's a president who's an old soldier called Paul von Hindenburg, who thinks, right, we're going to have to give him a position here because they're getting really popular at Nazi Party and we know that they're thugs and what have you. But if we don't give him something, he might do something extreme. So we'll give him the position of Chancellor, but as the Vice-Chancellor, we'll have someone sensible in, who's called Franz von Papen, who's the leader of the Conservative Party in Germany. And him and von Papen think that they can control Hitler. How wrong they were. So they make Hitler the Chancellor, basically Prime Minister of Germany. And he's just an animal, is Hitler. Really clever and cunning. It's not been confirmed whether this was actually staged or not, but very conveniently, there is a fire that breaks out in the Reichstag building in February. Hitler's just become Chancellor. And the Nazis immediately have the answers and say it's a communist plot. It's the communists who are trying to burn down the Reichstag. And because he's the president, he invokes emergency powers to protect the state, and he restricts civil liberties and political opponents. So basically, you can't run against him anymore. So he's locking himself in because of this Reichstag fire that he's blamed on communists. Then, later that year, the president, which is the office that's higher than the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, which is occupied by this old soldier, Paul von Hindenburg, he dies. And because Hitler's saying it's still a state of emergency and he needs to secure the country against these threats, he declares himself as the president as well. So he is now the Chancellor and the president. And because he's still claiming it's a crisis, in 1934, he goes after his opponents, not his political opponents, people in his own party who's helped him to get there. So horrible people like who were in the SA, who were like the forerunners to the SS. They were the horrible thugs and stuff, paramilitary groups. He wipes them out in what's called the Night of the Long Knives. And anyone who's been against him, he like arrests them or kills all their staff so that they're not effective, and purges his own party of people he don't want, and then bullies everyone in Reichstag that if you don't agree to this next piece of legislation, you're obviously in on this communist plot, you're in on these attacks against Germany, and you've just seen what I've done in the Night of the Long Knives. And the piece of legislation he puts through is he combines the office of the Chancellor and the President and into one, and he becomes the Führer of Germany. He is the leader of Germany in 1934. In 1935, Britain enters the frame because Britain signs an Anglo-German naval agreement with Hitler, which is the first kind of step on appeasing him, because everyone's seen how he's come to power really quickly. And he's been saying that he's going to overturn what happened at the Treaty of Versailles. Now, along with like losing loads of land and having to pay reparations, which he's stopped paying, by the way, Germany were only allowed to have a certain number of an army. You know, they were only allowed to have a certain number of men, certain number of ships and everything. And Britain signs an agreement with him saying that he can start rebuilding the Kriegsmarine a bit more, which is the German Navy, up to 35% of the Royal Navy. And that's starting to strain relations with everyone in Europe, saying, what are you doing? Why are you allowing him to blatantly go ahead and do what he wants? But Britain is saying, do you want another First World War? How horrendous that was? They're desperate to avoid it. I mean, the alternative is that they start another arms race, you know, who's going to build up their navy quickest, and that's exactly what led to the First World War, and everyone's terrified of another First World War breaking. Back in Britain at this time, we have George V on the throne, and we have a national government in place. This is because there's been a financial crisis in the interwar years due to Wall Street crash and unemployment and what have you. Britain's just trying to get back on its feet and recover from First World War, which devastated everybody. In 1931 to 35, we have Ramsay MacDonald, who leads the national government through the financial crisis. And then from 1935 to 37, we have Stanley Baldwin, who leads the national government. And the Conservatives are generally dominant in this period. But everyone's eyes are towards what's going on in Germany. Because in 1935, bearing in mind, Germany is already withdrawn from the League of Nations in 1933 when Hitler becomes Chancellor to avoid inspections because he is secretly rearming. How he did it was he like created loads of like public works that made it look like he was just improving country, but he were actually improving army. Like he creates these autobahns, which are these massive motorways in Germany, and they're basically to be used as airstrips or moving troops about. He sends his army, or people who are going to be in his army, on training exercises abroad on extended like outward bound holidays so that he can train him more people than he's allowed, because I think German army's only allowed about 100,000 men, but he trains loads more. They're not allowed to have a navy, well, apart from this Anglo-German treaty that they've just signed with Britain. But he's been training submarine crews because that's a loophole. No one said anything about submarines, so like U-boat crews are being trained. He's training pilots by having like them fly normal passenger planes and do military tactics in them, or he creates flying clubs that people join where they're training them to be military pilots, but it just looks like it's a normal club and it's all in secret. But in 1935, he openly reveals to the world, right, here's the deal. We have been rearming because Treaty of Versailles were an absolute humiliation. It were wrong, and we are rearming whether you like it or not. And it turns out he's actually got 300,000 troops, triple what he's allowed. He's openly revealed, I've actually got an air force as well. And conscription's being reintroduced in Germany, so everyone's got an obligation to join the army. And now, in 1935, Germany's too strong to challenge easily. Europe says, oh dear. Particularly in 1936, when he marches into an area called the Rhineland and remilitarizes it. Part of the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles was there's a bit of land in between France and Germany called the Rhineland, and the idea was you're not allowed any military in there. He's just marched troops in and said that it's my right to do so. Oh dear. And then in 1936, the Spanish Civil War breaks out. Now, this was basically Spain had a left-wing popularist government, which was supported by Russia. If you remember, Hitler don't like Russia because it's full of communists, and communists is a Marxist-Jewish conspiracy. So Russia apparently are supporting the left-wing Popular Front government, and this rubs up against far-right generals in Spain who launch a coup, which fails. So a civil war starts, and the main leader of the far-right forces, the nationalist forces in Spain, is someone called General Francisco Franco. Britain stays neutral in this. Hitler, he don't, and he thinks, tell you what I'm going to do, I'm going to help out Spain by testing out my Luftwaffe, particularly at a place called Guernica, where he bombs it into oblivion just to test out his new air force, and particularly a new tactic which is called Blitzkrieg. It means lightning war. Now, the idea of Blitzkrieg is, you didn't use tanks in Spain, but you do everything really quick before enemy knows what you're doing. You bomb with your aircraft, then you smash through with your tanks and get round back of them, and then while they're dealing with tanks that have gone all the way through you and like basically blazed a hole through your line, then troops are coming to follow up, so you don't know whether to turn round, you don't know whether to deal with troops who are coming against you. It's just as quick a war as you can do. Lightning strikes, lightning war, Blitzkrieg. General Franco ends up winning in 1939, and he establishes a dictatorship in Spain that lasts until he dies in 1975. 1936 is also the year in which we see Nazi Germany host the Olympic Games. This is Hitler's chance to show off to the world how superior German athletes are, but ends up getting humiliated when Jesse Owens, a black man from America, dominates over everyone. What a kick in the teeth that was to old Adolf. Germany did start some traditions, however, that year with the Olympic Games, including the Olympic relay, where you bring the torch from Olympia in Greece to the host city. 1936 is also the year that George V, King of England, dies and Edward VIII becomes the king. Now we have a problem. Edward VIII becomes king, but he has a relationship with someone called Wallis Simpson, who is an American socialite, but she's also, shock, horror, scandal, a divorcee. Unbelievable. And it creates a constitutional crisis because this won't do at all. Edward met Wallis Simpson in early 1930s, and she was married at the time, and he had an affair with her. It wasn't the first time he had an affair with a married woman, by the way, but he became deeply and obsessively infatuated her. She was witty, strong-willed, offered a break from rigid protocol like royal life, and so he becomes king in the January of 1936. Everyone's like, oh my God, he better break this off with her. But in October 1936, she's filed for a second divorce with her husband, her current husband. And everyone thinks we know exactly why she's doing that, because she's going to marry King. And it's true. Edward says he intends to marry her. The whole institution starts to panic. What the chuff are you talking about? And the reason why it's a problem is because it was at that time, it was socially unacceptable to allow the monarch of the country to marry a divorcee. And further to that, if you're King of England, you're also the head of the Church of England, which forbids remarriage after divorce while your former partner is still alive. Another problem was, because you're monarch of England, you can't do just what you want anymore. You've got to pass it by Parliament, because they're in charge. Everyone were against it. Stanley Baldwin were against it, Prime Minister. And to make matters worse, it was suggested that Wallis Simpson were quite fond of what the Nazis were doing and were quite sympathetic towards her, which is causing national security concerns. So not acceptable at all. So what happens? Edward sticks by her. And he gives the country an ultimatum. He says, right, I know you're not happy about this, but how's about if I marry her and promise not to make her a queen? She can be my wife, but she won't be queen. Cabinet are like, are you having a laugh? There is no way she is coming anywhere near this institution, and they reject it outright. So Edward turns round and he's got a choice. Is he going to stick with his country and his duty, or is he going to stick with the love of his life and leave it? And he chooses Wallis Simpson. He abdicates the throne. He's left without the political backing, without the religious backing. He's turned his back on his duty as the king, and he's married the woman he loves. And because he gives up the throne, it now passes to his younger brother. This is in December, who's called Albert. Everyone calls him Bertie, but he's called Albert Windsor. But he becomes king unexpectedly, and he chooses to be called George VI. Now, the reason why I chose George VI is, as the monarch, you can choose your royal name. It doesn't have to just be a name that you were born with. And he chooses George because his father was George V, and it would link him to him. But also, his actual name, Albert, was a bit of a sticky issue because Queen Victoria had decreed saying she does not want anybody who's part of the royal succession to be called Albert, because she wants the name Albert to be associated with her Prince Albert, who she loved unconditionally, doesn't want him to be compared with anyone else. So that's two reasons. And the third reason was Albert has got connotations of being a name of German origin, and we don't like the Germans at the moment. So there you go. What a pickle. And to make matters worse, in 1937, Edward, who's just abdicated, who's now Duke of Windsor, married to Wallis Simpson, becomes a vocal sympathiser of Hitler and Nazis. To be fair, the full horror of the regime wasn't known. But in October 1937, months after abdicating, he tours Germany as Hitler's honoured guest, gets wined and dined by all top Nazis. It's a terrible look. And he quietly gets elbowed out during and after the war, because he were he supported Hitler throughout and after the war. But yeah, moving swiftly on. Back in Britain in 1937, Stanley Baldwin steps aside and Neville Chamberlain becomes Prime Minister of the national government, and he pursues, famously, a policy of appeasement against Hitler, which means just let him have what he wants, because Treaty of Versailles was really harsh on Germany. They lost about 13% of the territory, 10% of the population. There's Germanic people in all these countries that he's wanting to expand into, and he might have a point, and we don't want, over anything else, we don't want a horrific war like the Great War happening ever again, because Britain have basically got a trauma over that, as have the rest of Europe, except for Germany, who are well up for it. In March 1938, the Anschluss occurs when Hitler intimidates, pressurizes, and uses propaganda to unite Germany with Austria, his homeland. He's claiming that Austria's just part of the German-speaking people. It were reduced to a little republic by the Treaty of Versailles and humiliated, and all German people want to be united into this new Reich. He's had Austrian Nazis funded and encouraged by Berlin, and now there's a guy called Benito Mussolini who's taken control of Italy and created a fascist dictatorship. They're in power, they're right next door to Austria, and plus Hitler and Mussolini are best buddies. They sign what's called the Rome-Berlin Axis, so they're joined at the hip. Austria's in the middle. Austria's pretty weak politically, and guess what? Hitler has set the table nicely and just marches into Austria. There's no resistance, and it's partly staged, but some people are quite happy about it. He's greeted by cheering crowds lining the streets. Massive propaganda victory for him. He's claimed the government's corrupt. Easier to get it back on its feet. And Britain and the rest of Europe do chuff all about it. Chamberlain's still appeasing Hitler. It's all right. He's just bringing together what was taken from him in Treaty of Versailles. We'll be okay. Surely we'll be okay. Well, Hitler's not done, because now he starts looking at a new country that was formed in the Treaty of Versailles called Czechoslovakia. And there's an area of Czechoslovakia, the new country, which is called the Sudetenland, which is next door to Germany. And he's claiming, is Hitler, that there are German-speaking people in the Sudetenland who want to be part of Germany. So he is saying we need to absorb that into the German Reich. And the Czechs are terrified. You have to do something about him. He's going to come in. He's just going to take over everything. Can't you see what he's doing? And Hitler, and this is going to take Europe to the brink of war. Hitler starts making his moves. Everyone can see what's coming. It's September in 1938. And so just before anything happens, Neville Chamberlain calls a conference with him. He says, can I just talk to you before you do anything? And this is where we get the Munich conference. So he flies to Munich, the city in Germany. Now, to be fair, the Sudetenland, which is in newly formed Czechoslovakia, there's 3 million ethnic Germans who live there. Hitler's had Nazis there, like he did in Austria, lobbying and causing issues and creating tension and trying to wheedle the way in. He's had them in there since 1933. He's a clever operator, is Hitler. And Hitler's basically come out and said, either you give us the Sudetenland or we're going to go to war with Czechoslovakia and get it. So Neville Chamberlain and France have gone to Czechoslovakia and said, look, just accept the demands, just give him Sudetenland, otherwise, he's going to do something daft here. Czechoslovakia are like, get rodded. Why the hell should we give up land when it doesn't affect you? So because Czechs are obviously against any sort of deal, this Munich conference that Neville Chamberlain leads with Hitler doesn't include the Czechoslovakians, and they're going to be discussing Czechoslovakia's land. Massively out of order. There's a certain politician back in Britain called Winston Churchill who's up in arms about it. You do not let him take the Sudetenland. You tell him no. If it means war, it means war. And he calls it, you're feeding the crocodile, does Winston Churchill. Chamberlain's like, no, I can talk him round. I want to avoid war. He's a reasonable man. So at the Munich conference, Czechoslovakia's fate is decided without them even being there with Hitler. And it's agreed that Czechoslovakia will cede the Sudetenland to Germany, and the German army moves in early October. Chamberlain flies back to Britain and he's smiling from ear to ear, and there's a famous picture of him landing at the airfield, and he makes a speech saying, "I hold in my hand a piece of paper signed by Herr Hitler, and it declares peace in our time." Basically, he's saying Hitler said he's going to take the Sudetenland, that's all he's going to go for, and we're not going to go to war. Everyone cheers him. In November that same year, 1938, we see the true nature of the Nazi Party when the violence starts escalating against the Jewish people, because we have Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, where there's an anti-Jewish riot where Nazi stormtroopers just smash Jewish businesses, loot all their property, brutalise them. Then after they've smashed all their businesses and livelihoods to bits, they present them the bill saying, "You need to pay for this." It's just absolutely anti-Semitic brutality. Just shows you exactly what they're like. And the whole world gets to hear about this. But no one does anything. No one can do anything. And in March 1939, Neville Chamberlain finally gets the message, because someone comes into his office, tell him, "Mr. Chamberlain, got some news for you from Germany." "What's happened?" "Well, you know that peace in our time that you had signed by Mr. Hitler? Best tear that up, because what's he done? Hitler's just marched into Czechoslovakia and taken the whole of it over. He's just completely ignored everything that were agreed, and Chamberlain's left humiliated. Finally realises, I've been dealing with someone who's just the devil. He's just not interested in any compromises or anything." In August 1939, the Nazis sign a pact with the Russians, the Soviets, with Joseph Stalin, that they won't attack each other. It's called the Pact of Steel, or the Nazi-Soviet Pact, which means that Germans don't have to worry about being attacked by Russians, so they can concentrate everything on other countries in Europe. Which brings us to Poland. Now, Poland is a country that's been was reinstated after the Treaty of Versailles after 123 years, because it had territory taken off it and been partitioned up by Russia, Prussia, and Austria, and had just ceased to exist. Well, it had come back into existence in 1918, but what it had done is it had taken land away from Germany, and part of the land that was given to Poland had split Germany in two and created a little part of East Germany away from the bigger landmass of Germany. And this little slither of land that Poland had, which was splitting up Germany as it reached the sea, were called the Polish Corridor. And there was a city called Danzig there as well, which was a free city, which had been declared a free city under the League of Nations. Well, Hitler starts saying Versailles split Germany in two when they created Poland. Germans in the Polish corridor and Danzig are being oppressed. It's very clear what his next target's going to be. And we all know that he's not just going to stop with just having that little corridor, just like he did with Czechoslovakia. He's going to take the old job lot. Britain finally takes a stand and guarantees Poland's neutrality and takes a hardline stance. If you attack Poland, we're going to war. On the 1st of September, Germans march into Poland. And on the 3rd of September, Neville Chamberlain comes on radio in Britain and sadly declares that Britain is now at war with Germany. And that's where we'll end part 1. In part 2, we will meet Winston Churchill, who has to deal with the fall of France, the Battle of Britain, as World War II kicks into gear. See you soon. Welcome back to Gist-ory, where you might not get the whole story, but at least you'll get the gist. In part 1, we were dealing with the gathering storm clouds of war as Hitler rose to prominence, broke the Treaty of Versailles, was appeased by Britain until he attacked Poland, and Britain finally took a line in the stand and declared war on Germany. They are joined by their allies France. Germany's joined by their allies Italy. And it's on. Neville Chamberlain is still the Prime Minister in 1939 when war breaks out, and he appoints Winston Churchill, a notable opponent to appeasement back to high office after he's been spending years in the political wilderness. He is now made the First Lord of the Admiralty once more. And Churchill becomes the most energetic and visible minister who's really for opposing Nazi Germany. Really vocal about it. He gains public support. All Parliament support him. And while this is going on, Germany absolutely smash Poland in about 2 weeks using these blitzkrieg tactics. And they're not done there. They invade into Norway as well, which the Britons try to stop. But Germans are there too quick, they're too organised, and the British response to the Norway campaign is a disaster. It's not very well organised, the conditions are horrendous, and it just fails flat on its backside. And Neville Chamberlain has lost everyone's confidence. I think he's absolutely done by being betrayed by Hitler and being humiliated by it, and he's forced to resign. And who becomes Prime Minister? On the 10th of May 1940, Winston Churchill becomes Prime Minister of Great Britain and declares he has nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. But he has no time to celebrate because in May 1940, the German war machine turns on France. Now, France are ready for Germans. They've got a massive line of fortifications on the German border called the Maginot Line, which is it's a series of forts and defences and trenches, barbed wire, tank obstacles. They're ready for them. But just like the Schlieffen Plan in World War One, where do the Germans go? They go through Belgium. So Belgium's at top, where border of France and Germany meet. You got Belgium at top just as it meets the English Channel. Germans go through somewhere called the Ardennes Forest, which is, everyone were thinking, there's no way. It's so thick and hilly and really impassable terrain through this Ardennes Forest. Germans are never going to get through. Oh my God, they've got through. So they get through. They go through Belgium, round back at Maginot Line. Even if they're coming over at Maginot Line, they just fly their Luftwaffe planes over it and just blitzkrieg to chuff France, who are absolutely not ready for Germans who are on top of their game, zooming forward with tanks, smashing through the lines. They don't know what's hit them. And in order to help with the upcoming invasion of France, Britain have got an expeditionary force at a place called Dunkirk as the Germans are breaking through. And everyone realises, oh my God, they're going to get surrounded at British here. We're absolutely wrong-footed. We're not prepared for speed at Germans. And they're zooming towards Dunkirk and they're going to trap the British expeditionary force at Dunkirk, which is on coast, and just wipe them out. And so this is going to be Churchill's first crisis he's got to deal with, not 2 weeks after he's become Prime Minister. And I'll tell you what, makes you proud to be chuffing British this, because from 26th of May to 4th of June, the call comes out for Dunkirk. Germans are advancing on these beaches, and they're getting strafed by Luftwaffe or all these troops who are stranded there. And they think, British Navy are thinking, we haven't got enough boats to get these lads off. So the call goes out, anyone who's got any sort of seaworthy boat in Britain, get yourselves over English Channel and get these lads back. And so normal people, fishermen, people with cruise yachts, people with just any boat they can find, just normal people, get involved in rescue operation and take the boats over channel under heavy bloody military battle conditions and help pick up these troops. And they manage, this is called Dunkirk spirit. It's like, don't give up, everyone mucking together, we'll get them home. And they rescue 338,000 British troops from Dunkirk. And it wouldn't have been possible if it wouldn't have been for like normal people, everyone mucking in together. Our lads are over there, get them back. And they managed to evacuate from Dunkirk. Yeah, it's a defeat, it's a withdrawal. But the Dunkirk spirit defines the British. And this is where Churchill makes his speech. We will fight them on the beaches, we'll fight them in the landing grounds, in the hills, in the streets. We'll never surrender. Absolutely right. In June, France collapses under Nazi regime. You have them marching through streets of Paris. You have those famous pictures of Hitler stood on that vista where you can see Eiffel Tower in background. Baddies are winning. Because let's be honest, Nazis, ultimate baddie. In any film, if you just want someone to be like killed outright, make them a Nazi. Do whatever you want to a Nazi because everyone hates them. They're just pure evil. It does make me laugh though when like Nazis are just seen as being these evil creatures to the point where you have like zombie films where they say not only are they zombies, they're Nazi zombies, which is meant to make them even worse. But it's like, I'm not sure which zombie is like politically motivated, but don't really matter that they've got a different ideology. You know what I mean? But that's just a separate aside. Nazis, evil, bad guys. Now, when France falls, Britain stands alone. Churchill makes an iconic speech saying the battle for France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin, and he says Hitler knows he has to break us in this island or lose the war. And if the British Empire should last 1,000 years, men will still say of her, this was their finest hour. Basically, we're ready for you. You want to come and try it? You come and have a go. Sometimes I think Churchill's speeches are a bit like wrestlers ranting or like boxers hyping a fight. It's like, come on. Yeah, you think you're hard enough. Come and have a go, Hitler. And in July and October, better be ready because here they come. This is in 1940. The Battle of Britain kicks off. German Luftwaffe start flying over the skies of Britain. We're outnumbered, but we're ready for them. We've developed radar and a home defense system. So if you see these German planes, massive amounts of German planes coming towards you, you've got spotters on the coast who can telephone up to the RAF bases, get them Spitfires and Hurricanes in the air up against them Messerschmitts. We're developing radar, which is giving us an early warning that no one really knows about to know when Germans are coming. Because Hitler's trying to break us. He needs to be superior in the air. He needs to knock out the RAF, Royal Air Force, so that he can unleash Operation Sea Lion, which is the invasion of Britain. But there's so very few, are holding him off. And for some strange reason, Hitler and Hermann Goering, who's in charge at Luftwaffe, make the decision to start bombing civilian targets. So cities and places up and down the country, which are like manufacturing hubs like Sheffield and Birmingham, and mostly like all over the place, but like terror attacks as well. He mostly bombs the hell out of London, which is famously called the Blitz. Then you get your air raid sirens, your blackouts, your ACAC guns my grandparents were very young, but they were in World War II in Sheffield, and they can remember being dragged down into shelters when air raid sirens went off, and can remember seeing like searchlights looking for German bombers. Must have been chuffing terrifying. And then when they found one, alt lights had like focus on that and you could see it in the sky, and all ACAC guns would be shooting. But then they'd talk about going to bed at one night, and then when you woke up, obviously bombs are all going off. You wake up and they were like, town centre gets obliterated because they're after all steel factories in Sheffield. But I've also heard stories about what it were like in London, which were even worse. I mean, that's every night. People having to go down into subway shelters and created a real bond between people, and Germans were just hammering them. But this were a real error in the Battle of Britain because it allowed RAF to resupply the ground crews and what have you, and eventually we end up beating them. Operation Sea Lion's off. Good try, Adolf, but no cigar. In terms of bombing, though, I mean, it wasn't just the Germans who bombed British cities. Allies paid back in kind, and they created some real horrific civilian casualties when they bombed places like Dresden in Germany. Absolute firestorm, so not entirely blameless on the civilian casualties front. Back in Britain, however, on the home front, it was like a second battlefield was this home front, and this is where civilians lived through bombing, rationing, evacuations, mobilisation, and it transformed the country and culture at country. Like loads of kids were evacuated from major cities out into countryside to escape the bombing. There were rationing, so you had to fairly share out all the food that Britain was producing and being imported in by Americans, supply ships. They end up importing about 20 million tons of food a year, which makes it vulnerable to U-boat attacks from Germans. You had your Dig for Victory campaigns, which encouraged people to grow vegetables. You had to do substitute foods like powdered eggs and what have you. You had ration books, which controlled how much meat and sugar, fats and clothing and fuel you had. Unemployment practically vanished because everyone was involved in work to support the war effort, and particularly women were mobilised. They were called up in 1941 to go into the factories, and it created a land army because obviously it was all men who were away fighting. They were fighting the home front war. So women worked for the first time as mechanics, engineers, munitions workers, drivers, fire watchers. There was a women's land army of 80,000 plus who kept the farms running. Women's voluntary service supported the Blitz victims and helped the shelters. The Home Guard was created, where you have things like Dad's Army, whereas older lads who couldn't go on front lines, they were back as last line of defence at Walmington-on-Sea. Don't panic. You had all the morale and propaganda campaigns. Make, do and mend, to be thrifty, keep calm and carry on. Churchill's speeches became national rallying points. You just had a complete effort. Everyone in the country pulled together. Women as well helped directly in the war effort, not just in the factories. I mean, there were Women's Auxiliary Air Force, radar operators, plotters and mechanics. There were the Wrens, even the future Queen, Elizabeth Windsor. She was part of the war effort. Everybody got involved. And because women helped win the war on the home front, it did allow them a stepping stone for future rights post-war. In 1941, the war in the Atlantic rages on. The Bismarck is sank, the huge German battleship, and the supply ships that are coming from America are terrorised by the U-boat wolf packs, which are launched from France, newly conquered France, from La Rochelle, from U-boat pens. But at Bletchley Park in Britain, Alan Turing and his team of boffins break the Enigma code, which is the German message system that the Kriegsmarine use. And through some exceptionally clever work and some daring bravery from sea crews and soldiers who actually capture intact Enigma machines from submarines and what have you, Alan Turing and his team are able to make a bomb machine, which isn't a bomb as in explode. It is the first computer that can work out or accurately predict as best they can the German Enigma code, which was a cipher. It's quite difficult to explain, but it worked on a rotor system where you pressed a button on what looked like a typewriter, but according to different settings every day, that will come out as a different letter. So it was completely scrambled, and they had to work it out at Bletchley Park, which is a great place to go, by the way. I'd recommend that you go for exhibits and what have you. They had to work out how an Enigma machine worked. They had to quickly work out within a day, because it got changed every day, what the different combinations might be. And the way that they worked that out, well, once they got the computer that could work it out, they had to have a bit of a starter for 10 as to what common words might be being used, so that they could work out letters and try and decipher it. And so they used to intercept weather reports, which started with Heil Hitler. They used to listen in on German conversations with their girlfriends and what have you, and try and get common names and themes, so that once they could work them out, they could compare it or feed it into the computer. And look, if it sounds confusing, it's because it is. I'm not clever enough to have worked out the Enigma machine, but Alan Turing and his team managed to shorten the war by so many years, and they had to keep it secret because they couldn't. If you watch the film with Benedict Cumberbatch in it, they often knew when supply ships were going to get raided, but if they saved every single one, the Germans would work out that they've cracked the code and would change their coding system. So sometimes they had the agony of having to watch people be killed when they knew it was going to happen. And it was so clever. And it only came out after the war. Cracking the Enigma, by the way, was a joint effort. It wasn't just the British, with the Poles as well. all sometimes get lost in this story. Throughout 1941, Churchill is desperate for the Americans to come into war. Please help us. Please come in. Please get involved. Roosevelt's still quite resistant to this. Don't want to drag American public into a war that's halfway around the world. However, he's willing to discuss with Churchill, obviously, supplies that are being offered, and also they're making an unofficial agreement called the Atlantic Charter as to how the world might look after the war. They decide that this World War II is a moral war and we can't have Nazism or any of this extremism after the war's done, and it should be led by countries in this Atlantic Charter, which is an updated version of the League of Nations that had been decided in 1918, and it would eventually become the foundation of what the United Nations is today. Nothing was signed, nothing was official, but it did show that America will be leading the post-war world, and it did suggest that America were against what's happening in Europe. They're not involved in war yet, but it's coming. In June 1941, Hitler makes arguably his biggest blunder of the war when he attacks and turns his back on Russia in Operation Barbarossa in June 1941. No one in the history of everything has attacked Russia and beaten because of the Russian winter. Once that hits, you're knackered. It happened to Napoleon, and it eventually happens to Germans. They absolutely steamroller into Russia, becomes a grinding battle that lasts years upon years and basically knackers him. Why he turned on Russia is still a matter of debate. Some were saying he were going for some oil fields in Russia. Some were saying it's because he was saying that the communists, and obviously he thinks communism's part of a Jewish plot. But he makes his biggest mistake. On the other side of the world, Germany's allies make their biggest mistake of the war when in December 1941 the Japanese attack the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and America enters the war. Thank goodness for that. And with our American cousins joining the fight, and with the Germans freezing their bums off in Russia, we will end part 2. In part 3, the war continues in Burma, in Africa, in Italy, and then eventually in the Day of Days, D-Day itself. See you soon. Welcome back to Gist-ory, where you might not get the whole story, but at least you'll get the gist. In part 2, we went through the opening years of World War II from Britain's point of view, and we are now moving into the year 1942. The Americans are now in the war. The Japanese attacked them at Pearl Harbor. Whoops. Want the best idea of that one? And Germany have gone and attacked Russia. Well, that wasn't the best idea either. But Japan are not done because they attack the British naval base and capture it at Singapore. Now, this is a nightmare for British. It's a massive defeat for not only Britain, but the British Empire as a whole. They go through the whole of Malaya, do Japan, in this campaign and end up capturing Singapore, which is meant to be a major strong point of it. Because Singapore, all defences for British are pointed out to sea because it's all surrounded by jungle, and British are thinking, there's no way anyone can come through jungle and get us. Oh my God, all Japanese are here. And Japanese just attack it from landside, completely blindsided. And what do they end up capturing? About 80,000 troops and take Singapore off. Nice one. That's about 15,000 British, 32,000 Indians, and 15,000 Australians. They're captured, they're forced into brutal forced labour camps, they're forced to build railways and other logistics. This is where you get the Burma to Thailand railway, which is called the Death Railway. This is where we get things like Bridge on the River Kwai, and loads of them die due to disease, malnutrition, and abuse from Japanese. Japanese invasion of Burma continues, and Britain are forced to retreat about 1,000 miles overland into India. And the issue here is that Burma, that's been taken by Japanese, is a key rice exporter to Bengal in India. And so a massive source of food has been cut off, which leads in 1943 to the Bengal famine. Now, this is a major issue. a major talking point to the present day, actually, because Allies eventually retake Burma, recapture it in 1944 to 45. But because the people have been starving in Bengal, there's a massive crisis now. And it's Winston Churchill who has several criticisms laid against him. So firstly, he doesn't help himself because his attitude towards India and the Indian people are appalling. He's a product of his time, which is the only sort of caveat I can give him. But he's made racist remarks about Indians, which are really harsh in the past. But that is what it is. He's also criticised because he refuses to divert shipping to Bengal, which would send grain to India. It's not just Churchill, but it's the War Cabinet as well, who argue that the ships were needed for the Mediterranean and the Pacific War. They also said that the famine might potentially be caused by local distribution failures, not an absolute shortage, controversial, and that sending grain wouldn't solve the underlying problem. Very difficult stuff, this. He's also criticised because it's thought Churchill believed Bengal did have enough food, but that's based on reports being false towards him. But it all influenced his reluctance to intervene and provide grain. And Britain itself was slow to recognise the scale of the crisis, and it was only when Archibald Wavell became the viceroy in India in 1943 that someone who Churchill appointed, who started really pushing hard for aid to ease the Bengal famine. A very controversial subject, still debated today. Churchill can be admired for many things, but also he's not above scrutiny. And situations like this do need a good deal of scrutiny. It's up to you to decide. History is an ongoing conversation. In 1942, the war rages in Africa, where we have General Bernard Montgomery, our main man, versus Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, in the sands of northern Africa. These are the major tank battles between these two. There's the first Battle of El Alamein that ends in a stalemate. There's major supply issues, particularly with Rommel, the Desert Fox, who manages to outfight and surprise the Allied forces, the Desert Rats, under Montgomery, and win some really alarming victories with very little equipment. And this eventually leads to a second Battle of El Alamein that becomes the first major land victory for Montgomery and the Brits in Africa. In the African campaign, we have also the formation of the SAS, the Special Air Service, and the enduring image of the Desert Rats who fight against Rommel. Rommel is seen, by the way, in history as one of our more noble opponents. He fought both Montgomery and George S. Patton, who was an American general, and he's seen as really competent, and he was an opponent of Hitler. Ended up having to being forced to commit suicide by the SS when he got found out to be complicit in, or potentially complicit in, an assassination attempt against Hitler. So, worthy opponent, worthy general, anti-Nazi. He'll do for us with Rommel. In May 1943, the Axis have been defeated in North Africa, and then the Allies, the British and the Americans, invade Sicily and Italy, going after Mussolini, who's the dictator of Italy. Now, this is an offensive that Churchill were pushing. He was saying, to get into Europe, you want to attack the soft belly of the crocodile, which he claimed was Italy. But Italy, we're a right slog. It's got so many mountains and so many winding roads and what have you. It were a really grueling battle. And one of the main battles that were going on were between Bernard Montgomery, who was British general, and George S. Patton, who was American general. They were wanting to be first to get all glory. So if you've ever seen the movie Patton, this shows it really well, where they're always trying to outdo each other as to who's going to conquer all major cities first and make best advances. Campaign moves on, and there's a key battle at a place called Monte Cassino, which is it's a grueling battle where the Germans are dug in at this like monastery at top of this like ridge that's guarding road to Rome, and it's a right slog to get it. 20,000 Germans end up dying, but about 55,000 Allied troops end up being killed. And it's actually the Polish troops who capture the ancient monastery at top of Monte Cassino. And Allies end up bombing this really ancient monastery and what have you, and it's awful, but it opens the road to Rome. Mussolini, he flees when he sees writing on the wall. He gets caught eventually by partisans who were against him in his own country and executed him and his mistress. And that is the end of Mussolini. You're on your own, Hitler. And in 1944, June the 6th, is the day of days. This is the D-Day invasion, a massive assault on Normandy. This is it. This is the big one, where the Allied forces, Americans, British, Canadians, they're all massing in Britain and they're going to invade Fortress Europe, Normandy, and take it back. Now, D-Day, if you're wondering why it's called D-Day, that's a military term. And basically, the D means day. But if you think of that, D-Day, treat the word day as zero because it just means the day an operation's starting. So D-Day means the date's starting. So the days that follow D-Day are called D plus 1, D plus 2, etc., etc. It's to tell the troops who are involved that is the day the operation starts on D-Day, so day zero, and then they know, according to the operation, how many days on from that day the operation's taken. So they'll say things like, on D plus 2, you need to be at this area. At D plus 4, we want to have taken this area, etc. But because it's military terminology, but because this is such a massive operation and this is so significant and iconic, the name's stuck, and so it's called D-Day. Now, the plan for D-Day is the main thrust of it is going to be attack on the beaches of Normandy, which are at the top of France. And they're going to hit 5 beaches. So they've split them up into code words. So there's Utah and Omaha, which are on the left-hand side. If you're looking at a map, on the left-hand side, near the Cherbourg Peninsula, that's what the Americans have been assigned to. Then you've got Juno Beach, which is what the Canadians are going to attack, supported by British commandos. And then you've got Gold and Sword Beaches, which the British are going to attack, which is near Caen. And that's going to be their target. They're going to land there and they're going to take Caen. Now, overall command of this, the Day of Days, D-Day, is going to be the Supreme Allied Commander, who's Dwight D. Eisenhower, the American. But the land battle is going to be directed by General Bernard Montgomery. Now, there was a big push and pull as to who was going to actually command the ground troops. Was it going to be Montgomery or was it going to be George S. Patton, who's the Americans' best general? But George S. Patton had absolutely knackered it for himself because while he were doing his campaigns in Italy, he were right rough and ready with Patton. He's slapped one of his own men for apparently being a coward when he had shell shock, PTSD. So get yourself up to the front line, stop crying and gibbering, get up there. It got into press and he got absolutely slaughtered for it. He had to apologise to in public. And he's also said something about the Russians, which has upset him diplomatically because they're meant to be our allies, but he's made some sort of comment as in, well, can't really trust them as far as you can throw them sort of thing. So he's made a rod for his own back. Politically, it doesn't go well if he's in charge of a major offensive. So Bernard Montgomery has been given responsibility, and it's a right sour taste in Patton's mouth. Before the beach landings, there's going to be a massive aerial assault with airborne troops, which is a relatively new method of war, which is using paratroopers jumping out of a plane during combat conditions. And if you've seen Band of Brothers or things like that, you'll know how horrendous that was with Easy Company. That's American perspective. But D-Day kicks off with the British because Major John Howard and 181 men of the Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire Light Infantry in Horsa gliders land at midnight at Pegasus Bridge, which is a key bridge on the approaches to the Normandy beaches, and secure it against the Germans. It is the first place liberated in France by the British. From midnight to 2 in the morning, you have all Allied paratroopers attacking with airborne troops. And then at 5:30 in the morning, you have the naval bombardment of the beaches. 6:30, which is called H hour, a bit like D-Day, it just means the time the operation starts. The beach assaults, the Americans hit the beaches at Utah and Omaha. Omaha Beach being particularly bloody, as we've seen on films like Saving Private Ryan. It's horrendous. And about an hour afterwards, the British and the Canadians hit their beaches at Juno, Sword and Gold. There's heavy resistance but a foothold is achieved, and the British and the Canadians advance onto Caen, which is a major city in Normandy. Heavy resistance, Germans aren't giving an inch. Eventually it falls, and Americans break through on their end of Normandy through the bocage, which are massive hedges and what have you that we see on Band of Brothers and stuff. And this leads in summer 1944 to France finally being liberated. D-Day is a success, but there's heavy resistance throughout. In September 1944, General Montgomery comes up with Operation Market Garden, which is an effort to move into Germany in the most efficient and quickest way possible. And the idea is with Operation Market Garden, it's going to be a two-phased attack. Market is going to be an airborne invasion with paratroopers, which are going to seize key bridges in Holland, which will lead down one main road into Germany, because they've seen Holland as being a place where Germans aren't stationing their best troops. They've got like the reserves there. That's what the intelligence says. And the garden part of the offensive is going to be a massive armoured column with tanks that are going to follow up where these paratroopers have seized these bridges along this long road, and it becomes known as Hell's Highway. And you may have heard of a certain film called A Bridge Too Far, which is exactly what happens here. It describes it perfectly. There's these several bridges that lead into Germany in Holland, and they choose all these bridges strategically, but the furthest bridge away is Arnhem, and it's just a bridge too far because this armoured column is slowly driving up and securing these bridges. So idea is that paratroopers land at each bridge and then tanks come up and meet them and obviously support them. But it's just too far away as Arnhem. And what happens is 1st Airborne are meant to land and secure it and wait for these tanks to come. But they get scattered and they land about 8 miles from Arnhem, and it gives Germans time to realise what's happening and properly get ready. And what they don't realise is it's not just raw recruits and reserves who are here. It's 2nd Panzer Division who are real, efficient, professional, proper German soldiers. And 1st Airborne end up getting cut off at Arnhem, and they're surrounded by Germans fighting for their lives, waiting for this armoured column to come up this one road. But the issue with Market Garden is it had such a wide margin of failure because it were only one road. So all you need is one hold up on this road, and a whole column of tanks that are coming have to stop. And that happens if a tank breaks down, or if there's any delay, or there's any obstruction in the road, or they meet any resistance. And it ends up being delayed for about 36 hours in total, does this tank column that in film Michael Caine's in charge of. And all this time, you've got 1st Airborne fighting off these Germans who are surrounding them, Sean Connery and Anthony Hopkins. There is quite a funny situation that happens, though, because one of the battalions that's led by Lieutenant Colonel John Frost actually gets to bridge, whereas they're all scattered everywhere at 1st Airborne. John Frost's battalion's at the bridge, surrounded by Germans who are coming towards them, and Germans come forward with a white flag, basically saying, right, we're going to discuss surrender terms because you're knackered here, basically. John Frost goes and meets them, and Germans are like, right, here we are, we're going to discuss surrender. John Frost turns around and says, I'm afraid we can't accept your surrender, we won't be able to keep you all here. Germans are like, not us, you bloody idiot. And it just shows some gallows humour from John Frost. He ends up getting wounded. They hold out against Germans as long as they can, but they eventually get wounded and he gets captured, and he spends the rest of the war as a POW. They managed to rescue Sean Connery and rest at he's called Hart is the actual commander, but they managed to rescue some of the 1st Airborne, but most of them get wiped out. But then again, shows the British grit, shows the determination. In 1944, Germans, although they're getting pushed back, they try one last major offensive, again through the Ardennes forest, called the Battle of the Bulge. No one thinks they're going to come through Ardennes forest. There's no way. It's too hilly and everything. Oh, they're here again. And the Battle of the Bulge refers to, if you're looking at a map and you've got the lines of where the two armies are advancing on each other, the Germans pushed that far into the Allied lines that there was a bulge that was created in the line. as if they were going to break through. But the British and the Canadians held the line, and then you have the Americans holding the line, particularly in freezing conditions at Bastogne, Easy Company, Band of Brothers, and the Germans fail. The Battle of the Bulge doesn't get through, and that was their last effort, really. On the Eastern Front, they've been absolutely knackered of Germans from fighting Russians. Battle of Stalingrad is like a meat grinder. There's Battle of Kursk, which involves loads and loads of tanks. They're starting to lose ground to Russians. It's all going wrong. And in 1945, Russians are advancing on Berlin. Allies are starting to break through, getting over the Rhine River in the west. Russians get to Berlin first, and they are out for revenge. They are brutal. Surround Berlin, street to street fighting. Hitler retreats into his bunker. Can hear them all advancing. Writings on the wall. And on the 30th of April, there's a gunshot heard in the bunker. Adolf Hitler shot himself. Führer's dead. 2nd of May, Berlin surrenders to the Russians, and on 8th of May, there's an unconditional surrender from Germany. That is called VE Day, is the 8th of May. It is Victory in Europe Day. The Allies have won on the Western Front, but the Japanese refuse to surrender, and there's brutal inter-island fighting between the Americans and the Japanese. Japanese just won't surrender. They've got that warrior spirit. But on the 6th of August, the Americans seal the deal when they drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and obliterate it. And then for good measure, on the 9th of August in Nagasaki, they drop another atomic bomb, wiping out the city for years to come. 15th of August, Emperor Hirohito surrenders, which is called VJ Day. Victory over Japan Day. World War II is finally over, but the scars run deep. What was previously unknown to the outside world becomes revealed. The full extent of the Nazi genocide and brutality is revealed to the world, and we are told of the Holocaust of the Jewish people. 6 million Jewish people are murdered in death camps, work camps, summary executions, in an industrial, calculated genocide. It's 2/3 of Europe's Jews that are murdered in this horrific, unfathomable tragedy that the world will never recover from and never should. The cost of the war is astronomical. There's between 70 and 85 million people dead. That's civilians and military. World War II is the deadliest conflict in human history to date, and the architect of it all shot himself. Some say he's escaped justice, but not everyone escaped justice. We see the Nuremberg trials following the war, which is the trial and the execution of high-profile Nazi criminals who hadn't killed themselves or fled, and the Jewish authorities would hunt down escaped Nazi war criminals for years to come. Hitler is dead and the Nazis are gone, but the tensions aren't over yet. Joseph Stalin, the leader of communist Russia, helped the Allies defeat the Nazi war machine, but he himself is responsible for the deaths and has killed up to 9 million people of his own people in his communist dictatorship. And in the years that follow, an iron curtain will fall over Europe, separating Russia from the West, starting what we know as the Cold War. And with that, we will end our episode. Now, that might not be the whole story of the Second World War. I'm pretty sure it's not. But hopefully, that's given you the gist. In our next episode, we will conclude our story of Britain and look at the post-war world leading up to the modern day. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I've really enjoyed it, but as I say, I'm not a professional, I'm not a historian. If I've got some facts wrong, got things muddled up, please set me right in the comments. I'm here for the story and the tale, and it's just how I understand it. If you've liked this episode, please give us a like. If you want more content, please subscribe. If you've got any suggestions on how I can make this better, or anything you wish to discuss about the history, give us a comment below. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. This is a labour of love. It's a work in progress. I'm learning as I go. But as much as I've enjoyed it and as fun as it's been, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, and this episode is now history. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourselves. Ta-ra!